recommendations in relation to the environmental, economic and social aspects of the Lower Thames crossing. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and live streamed to the Council's website. And I'd also like to remind members and officers to mute their microphones when not speaking. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies this evening?
No, no apologies, Councillor.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the minutes. I move that the minutes of the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force meeting held on the 12th October 2020 to be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes?
Agreed.
I think Councillor Muldooney's got a hand up.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Can I just ask for the minutes to be expanded, please, on page 5? When I asked about the green areas in Chudwell St Mary, when I listened to the playback, Anna actually said that Steve Plum had agreed that other green spaces should be on the list, specifically Alsett Heath and Wickham Fields. So please, can that be minuted, and the LTC economic benefits mitigation list be updated accordingly? Thank you.
I think that all sounds reasonable. If we could have those changes made to the minutes, please. Any other comments arising from the meetings minutes? Any hands up, Lucy?
No, no hands up.
Perfect, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, urgent items of business. I've not agreed to any items of urgent business this evening. So moving on to declaration of interest. Does anyone wish to declare declaration of interest? I can't see any hands on my screen. Anything, Lucy, from your end?
No, no hands up.
Brilliant, thank you. Moving on. So which brings us to the business items of the agenda. Number 5, this is the DCO withdrawal and next steps. This will be given as a verbal update. We're going to have around about 30 minutes for this item. Just before we start, I'd like to take a moment just to thank Anna and the officers at Thurrock Council for the work they've put in on this item, and also for Stantec, Dermot Scanlon, Claire Soring, Emma May Eshelby and Chris Stratford. I think they've really come together and brought Thurrock alongside Gravesham Havering and put us in a much better working position. And on that, I'd like to let Anna present this report.
Chair, just before I do, Laura Blake put her hand up, so I don't know whether she wants to deal with the question that she's got before I move on.
Thank you very much, Anna and Chair. Can I just ask, are we webcasting live on YouTube? Because I'm having messages saying people are struggling to find it on YouTube. Are we webcasting?
Yeah, we're live. It's on Public Eye on the Thurrock Council website.
Oh, it's not the YouTube as it normally is, no?
No, so it's on Public Eye. So if you go onto the Thurrock Council website, and then there'll be a thing that says committees and recordings, Public Eye, and then it'll be live streaming there.
I'll try and find it on there and share it with people. Thank you.
Laura, just to put this out there, the council normally put it on YouTube after the meeting, but the live ones are all actually on the website now. It changed probably about 5-6 weeks ago.
Okay, do you want me to proceed then, Chair, with item 5? So,
yes, please, Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that Highways England submitted their development consent order application on the 23rd of October. Thurrock Council were then given until the 6th of November to produce an adequacy of consultation response, and members will be aware that I've shared that consultation response, both the Thurrock only response and the joint response with Gravesham and the London Borough of Havering by email. The intention is those documents will be published on our website, and I'm working with the communications team to get that updated. We now have Gravesham and Havering's permission to share them. Ordinarily, the Planning Inspectorate reviews a DCO application and takes into consideration the adequacy of consultation response and makes a determination as to whether they wish to accept the application or otherwise. I believe that they wrote to Highways England asking for further information prior to the acceptance deadline, which was the 20th of November. Highways England then provided some additional information to Highways England, to the Planning Inspectorate rather, and they still issued a minded to refuse acceptance letter. Highways England then took the decision to withdraw the application on the 20th of November rather than have acceptance refused. However, the Planning Inspectorate has published on its website, and that again is the letter that I've shared with members, a 49-page document that basically sets out the issues and concerns that the Planning Inspectorate has with the application as submitted. Just to provide an update for members, before I hand over to Chris to provide you with a summary of the issues with the application, we understand Highways England are intending to resubmit their application some point next year. We don't have a date as yet. We are working through the issues that we have with Highways England and its application at the moment, and there are a series of meetings set up with officers and the technical team to work through those issues. We will provide an update as and when it's available in terms of next steps and programme. But in the meantime, I'll hand over to Chris, who has been leading the Stantec team in relation to the response to that Planning Inspectorate letter and issues with the application. So Chris, if you'd like to give a summary for members, and then we can have some questions at the end if you've got any.
Of course. Right. The 49 pages, 47 pages, is in two parts. The first 12 pages are in effect what would have been the non-acceptance letter by the Planning Inspectorate, PINS, and the remaining 35 pages are from BDB, which is a legal firm who represent Highways England. And it is essentially them writing on behalf of Highways England to answer the PINS queries. And it's called a signposting request. And it's 35 pages long. I don't think it's particularly good, but it's there. I won't go into too much detail of that because it's largely been superseded by the 12 pages of the PINS summary of all the issues. We have a meeting with PINS tomorrow to go into that in more detail, but in summary, and I try not to go into too much technical detail for you, there are 10 things that they raise, and I'll go through them one by one. First of all, highways and transport assessment. Now, there are two aspects to transport in a DCO, in this DCO. One is the transport modelling, and that applies to both operational traffic and construction traffic. And that's based on an approach and a methodology which is tried and tested from the Department for Transport. And then there's what's called a transport assessment. And that essentially tries to assess the impacts and any required mitigation from those assessed impacts. Now, when I was there, I was asking for this. In fact, it was published in a document that LTC sent out to local authorities saying we would be sending that out in August. Anyway, it never came out, and Highways England decided that they would not submit it to anybody until the actual application was accepted. And PINS have said, that's not right. First of all, it concentrates on only the big roads. It doesn't cover the local roads and the sort of intermediate roads. It's too generic. It doesn't have any detail. It doesn't assess the environmental effects particularly. And this should have been shared with local authorities. Well, no surprise there. So that's the first one. We've now got it, but we have yet to go through it. Then associated with that, they've made the point that actually Highways England need to do much more detail in terms of construction traffic management. Now, assuming that they've got an assessment of effects and the impacts that the project creates throughout the 6 or 7 years of its construction, there would have to be a number of management proposals. So what are they? And basically, the detail given is lacking and it's too generic. And traffic management would involve partial closures, full closures of roads, traffic light systems, diversions, that kind of thing. And we've not really seen any of that. And furthermore, the document is not currently a secured document under the DCO. In other words, they don't necessarily have to follow it. So those two things are kind of in tandem. Not an unusual statement, really. We've been saying that for quite some time. Then straying into Peter's stuff, there are two matters related to the river. One on jetty usage. They're saying that the proposal to use the jetty that exists there, there's not much consistency of how many times it will be used and how many barges would use it, because different documents say different things. And they don't understand the navigational effects of such barges using it over the period. And the second element of that is that they've said that there is no navigational assessment undertaken to assess whether all those barges going in and out have an effect on the operation of the river. So they've actually asked for that to be provided. Then they criticised the site waste management processes. And this is very much tied to the first two items, which is transport assessment and construction traffic, because obviously the project will produce a certain amount of waste. Now, the waste will come from excavating what's called the trace, which is where the road goes. It will come from the tunnelling, and it will come from a whole range of other sources, from demolitions, etc. And it's not entirely clear what happens to it, whether they can reuse it, whether it's being transported by river transport, or whether there's HGV movements associated with how that's handled. And obviously, as part of the government's sort of green agenda these days, trying to find a way to handle it that causes zero effect is obviously the way to go. So they've asked for that site waste management plan to be produced. Then number 6 is the habitats regulations assessment. Now, this is an ecological thing. It is essentially trying to assess whether the project has any effect on the European protected areas, which are largely wading birds and wetlands, which encompass both sides of the Thames along the estuary. And they're basically saying that the effects are not properly defined, they're not properly quantified. The in combination effects are not given much detail. There's poor quality in the screening process. There's several related assessments that don't have any evidence. So they're not very complimentary about that. Now, that's something that we don't get involved in, because it's entirely under the responsibility of Natural England, who will be all over this. So we don't need to necessarily worry about it. Then there's about 30% of the 12 pages, all to do with the fact that Highways England has not followed government guidance in respect of how they've done their consultation. And this is about two things: sufficiency of information at formal consultations and in technical engagement, and especially the lack of feedback given to responses issued. Now, they go on about this for 3.5 pages, so it's not a small thing. And it's something we've been saying for a long, long time. So that's a big one. And I personally think that it would be difficult for them not to go out to public consultation again, but it is their decision. Then there is a small thing called a Landscape and Ecology Management Plan, or a LEMP. and they said that there's nothing there to demonstrate how the various mitigation proposals for landscaping and ecology mitigation are actually going to be achieved. How do you do that? It's a small point, but they make it towards the end. They point out towards the end also in number 9, the 9th thing, that there are a number of consultees that have been missed off from involvement. Excuse me, 11 of them. Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis, I don't know what that one is, Southfleet Parish Council, the Port of Gravesend, and a whole range of small utility network companies. So that's a bit of an oops. And then number 10 is it points out over several pages a whole load of minor errors and omissions in several things. There's the book of reference. Now, the book of reference is a catalogue, an supposedly accurate catalogue of every piece of land, all land interest that is affected by the project. And that could be freehold, leasehold, subleases, tenancies, everything. It's a complete list of everybody involved. Then there are 2 types of plans. Well, there's several types of plans, but there's one called land plans, which are the graphic representation of that book of reference. And it tells you whether Highways England want to acquire that piece of land either permanently or temporarily. And then there are works plans, which actually demonstrate what the works are. And there are several matters in the environmental statement. And then there's a lack of searchable PDFs for a whole range of other plans. So that is the list of items. And obviously the last 3 are fairly small, but the other 7 are substantial, and they can be grouped into transport and waste and how that's all dealt with, navigation and jetty, the HRA all on its own, that's the Habitat Regulations Assessment, and then the whole government guidance process. And just to touch on the 35 pages of the Bersham Dyson Bell letter, it seems to concentrate an awful lot on the fact that because Highways England have done something before, and because nobody else has done it, there's no need to do anything. And they rely on that almost exclusively. And bear in mind, this is the attitude of Highways England prior to the big changeover in the last few weeks. So it tries to point out that whilst there's no transport assessment, for instance, don't worry because we've dealt with all the elements of it anyway. Well, that's actually not true. And it goes through, again, 10 different items that obviously the planning inspectorate have asked them to detail. And it essentially tries to point out that most of this stuff is either not necessary or it's never been asked for in the past, and therefore don't worry about it. And clearly Pins were not very happy with that. So is that sufficient update for you?
That's good, Chris. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think that's got the key point. I've got one. I'm assuming this is a typo, but on the consultees named, I'm trying to find the page number on this PDF. The ones with the police of the Metropolis and Southfleet Parish Council.
Page 9 and 10.
Yeah. So is it? I'm assuming that's meant to be Orsett Hospital Minor Injuries Unit.
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, I know about Orsett. I've never heard of Orsett. I assumed it was somewhere in the south, but I'd like to think they would have been consulted, because when you've got a building project this big, invariably someone's going to need some minor injury attention at some point throughout the process. But thank you for that. When we speak to them tomorrow, we can ask them. It's a simple point.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Anna, anything else to add before I open to questions?
Nothing from me.
Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank everybody that was involved in the adequacy of consultation response? I mean, it's clear from that statement and that update that many of the things that we've been asking for all along have been significant issues why involved in the rejection, which led to the withdrawal of the DCO. So, I mean, it's a fantastic victory for us and the other councils that did the joint adequacy of consultation response. So I think we should take a moment and celebrate that, because we weren't necessarily expecting that to happen. And everybody who's been involved in that, I think, should have a moment to congratulate themselves about that success. I mean, yes, a lot of these issues, we've been talking about them for the last year and a half, or however long some of us have been on the committee, I imagine. Certainly the adequacy of consultations, certainly we've kept hearing from officers and others that you're not getting the technical information that you need, or you are getting technical information but it's inadequate, or it's not the full information that you need. So really glad to hear that PINS has recognised that and has basically told Highways England that they need to pull their socks up. And also good to see that in all probability they will have to go out to consultation again. And I look forward to them actually maybe doing a proper consultation this time, where residents are actually going to get heard, and there might be some movement on some of the more pig-headed issues that have gone on. So yeah, I mean, overall, obviously it's not the end of the process. It's not a complete victory. They're still going to come back and resubmit a DCO, but I think it's a great success, and really glad to see it happen. Thank you.
Councillor Madoni, just for your ears, I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear this, but as part of the review of the DCO documentation, we will have the health and equalities impact assessment to review. So that's something that officers are picking up in the new year.
Wow, hallelujah. At last. Yeah, I mean, it is good to hear that we've had some of this information now ahead of the next DCO resubmission, to give you guys a bit more of a chance to actually look at it, because as I understand from what you've said before, it's a substantial amount of information, 55,000 pages of information. So yeah. I guess that's going to keep you busy.
When we come on to the work plan later, Chair, it might be appropriate for us to dedicate a session once we've done the review of the materials. I'm thinking the March meeting, because we're going to be on tight timescales to get information back, but it might be that we come and present on the material that they've submitted. Some things will change, of course they will, because they've got to address the issues already, but it may be a good opportunity for us to do that at that point.
Thank you. I completely agree with you, Councillor. It's a victory nonetheless, and we've got a way to go yet before things come back at us. But yeah, completely agree. And I'm over the moon to see the health impact assessments as well. That's something we've been pushing for. And like you mentioned, everything that's on that list we've been talking about in this task force. So yeah, we are on the trigger and hitting the right points. Laura Blake.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take a moment to publicly thank Anna and Chris and the team and everyone that's been involved in producing the adequacy of consultations, both for Thurrock and the individual councils, and the joint responses that everyone's made. A lot of work has gone into that. That is very apparent, and I would just like to publicly thank all of you that were involved in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm sure it's appreciated by everyone involved. Yeah, I completely agree with you as well. Fantastic piece of work coming forward. Councillor Rice.
Yes, Chair. Anna, on transport modelling and assessment, does that mean that the Directorate would push Highways England into looking at protecting residents more when it comes to highly urbanised areas, such as, cut and cover?
The transport assessment isn't going to lead to more cut and cover, Councillor Rice. The transport assessment is looking at what the impacts are and how they can be mitigated. And cut and cover, we've talked about cut and cover extensively in relation to the proposed route. cut and cover isn't a solution that's available any further than what is there now. The transport assessment will identify other mitigations, which may include specific routes. Well, it will include specific vehicle routes, how much material can be brought in through other means rather than on the road. We will be looking at the assessment of traffic impacts on our local roads and any mitigation that may be needed through weight controls, weight restrictions on the roads, that sort of thing. Traffic lights, roundabouts, all of those sorts of mitigations that may be needed to relieve local congestion that may be caused as a consequence of additional vehicles on the road. Of course, we heard from Peter Ward last time that they're having conversations with Highways England about the potential to use the port to bring materials in, which also has a benefit in terms of reducing the amount of vehicles on the road. But, we have talked extensively about cut and cover. We've had Highways England present to us on that, and for the various reasons that were outlined in the last paper that came a year ago, I believe. I think it was December last year. Cut and cover, further cut and cover along the route isn't going to be an option that's available.
Councillor Weiss, would you add something to that?
No, not at all. I mean, the cut and cover provides protection, Chair, for residents. It's quite clear that, Highways England doesn't give two regards to local residents. When you consider that residents of Chadwell, Alsett Heath in particular, will be less than 500 metres away from this route. So we need the utmost protection. Otherwise, at the moment we wear masks for COVID-19, people will be wearing masks and breathing apparatus because they won't be able to breathe properly.
I think that was a statement, Chair, more than requiring an answer from me. It is what it is, I'm afraid. And there's more means to mitigate the road than cut and cover. And in actual fact, when we assess the information, we've already had some level of information on air quality. Unless it breaches the guidelines and the standards, then Highways England don't actually have to provide any mitigation at all. So obviously we've got to do a review of the DCO application. We've got a professional team lined up ready to review that information and provide us with advice. But if the advice is that it's not breaching the guidelines, then I'm afraid there is no mitigation that they are required in law to provide, and that's a fact.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the Democratic, see if anyone else has got their hand up, because I can't see any more on my screen.
I think Councillor Allen had his hand up next.
Councillor Allen.
You're on mute, Councillor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dem Services. Just touching on the impact assessment, so question for Anna regarding that. In terms of ecological and environmental impact, do you still feel that it's going to be a damning report put forward?
What do you mean by a damning report, Councillor Allen?
Well, in terms of the impact that it's going to have both environmentally and ecologically, with CO2 emissions, NOx 2.5s, PM 2.5s, and PM10s. Could you say that it's going to be a damning report in terms of the impact that will have?
Okay, we haven't undertaken a full review of the environmental impact assessment yet, or the environmental statement that comes out of that assessment. That's work that is underway and work that we will be picking up in the new year, along with our technical team. If Highways England, as I've already stated, if Highways England breach any regulations in relation to the impacts of the scheme, they have to, in law, provide a level of mitigation to it. Our mitigation list that we've produced is an enhanced level above and beyond that which Highways England would be required to provide in law. Until we've provided undertaken the review of the ES, I'm not really in a position to provide any comments on it, Councillor Allen. It is something that we've talked about, that hopefully in March we'll be able to do a dedicated session to the review of the DCO documentation, and at that point we'd be able to come back to you with some factual information once we've undertaken that review. But the position remains that Highways England has to produce and mitigate any impacts where they're likely to give rise to a significant environmental effect. That's the law of the land, I'm afraid. And so, we need to undertake that review to understand where there are any potential breaches of that.
I understand. Thank you, Anna. But it's going to certainly be a big impact, even through the construction side, when things get going. But once it's in terms of opening the actual roads, again, that's where we're going to have anything from the region of, I should imagine, 160,000 vehicles possibly using the new road.
I don't know what the current predicted vehicle numbers are for the new road. I don't think it's that many in opening. It might be when it gets to year 20 or 25. It's not that much in opening. We need to just understand the impacts on air quality come about from vehicles standing more than vehicles moving. So as long as the road is free flowing, the impacts on air quality and in the environment are much reduced. And also, Highways England predict that the year opening will be the worst for environmental impact in terms of air quality and particulate matter because of the shift in terms of government policy and human behaviour to more sustainable modes of transport, including electric vehicles. So Highways England's predicted year opening date is it was 2027 to 2028. It's more than likely going to be 2028, potentially into 2029 now. Let's see what they update and publish, but certainly 2028 at its earliest. And you are quite right that the construction impacts of this road are going to be far worse than the road in operation, without a doubt.
If I can just come back, Chair, in terms of using local companies as well, for the construction, are we going to push for that, Anna?
Councillor Allen, yes, that is something that we're in discussions with as part of one of the legacy benefits. So you'll be aware, those of you that have been involved in the A13 will be aware that we've spent over £8 million locally as a council with local businesses to supply goods and services to the A13. In much the same way, we will be looking to Highways England to secure a proportion of the expenditure on the road with local goods and suppliers providers. That's part of the circular economy. It's part of the social value of the scheme. Can't give you any detail about the figures at the moment because we're still to discuss that. I'm hoping there's something in the DCO documentation around it when we get to reviewing that, so we'll have a greater level of understanding.
Thank you, Anna. Just one more thing, Chair, if I can. In terms of mitigation, can we really push for trees, Anna? Because we know the job that trees do and how they filter the COs. I mean, obviously, the more trees that we can have, the better. I think that that we have those natural filters in place. So if we could really stress to Highways England, I'd actually call for 1 million trees.
Okay, well, we're coming on to the economic mitigation list, which I'm sure tree planting forms part of, but I think we're still on item 5, which is the DCO withdrawal and next steps at the minute, Chair.
Yeah, correct. I was just about to interject. We are going to be going on to that, Councillor Allen, for the next agenda item. I noticed that Robert Quixley's hand up for quite a long time, so I'd like to let him in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for Anna, really, this. Under the highways and transport item, the first one that Chris commented on, he mentioned about they were required to put more detail on construction traffic management. Now, is this an opportunity? Because I think in one of the earlier meetings, Anna, you said that a lot of the responsibility for organising that construction management was going to be with the local council. So is there an opportunity for us to get what we require included in this update that they have to do?
Yeah, absolutely. The construction and environmental management plan would be an item that would need to be agreed anyway. So it may be something that we will review it as part of the DCO document review. We will get our transport planners and our professional team to review it also and provide comments on it, which we'll feed back to Highways England. If we can agree some elements, we will. If we can't, then they will be items that will be up for debate and discussion as part of the examination process, even when Highways England successfully submit an application that then gets accepted. You'll be pleased to hear that we've already had preliminary discussions about the hours of operation. Do you remember we had quite a lot of conversations about the hours of operation and the duration of it? You remember me referring to Highways England saying that summer ran from March to November, if you recall that, and the long hours of operation. So they're alive to that issue because that was a specific issue in our economic mitigation list. And so, yes, in short answer, we're all over it, Robert. We just need a little bit of time to review all of the documentation. But yes, it is definitely something that is high up on our list of priorities and high up on our radar of things to try to reach an agreement if possible, but not selling our souls down the river, if you like. It's not at any expense or any cost. But we do have to take a reasonable approach to these things. They do have to work. They will have to work at weekends as well. They will have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the tunnel excavation, for example. So there are certain elements of the scheme where we won't have a level of control, but where we can have a level of control, particularly where it's close to residents, we will be seeking the maximum protection and mitigation for residents that we can.
Thank you, Anna. As usual, you're one step ahead of me and predicted my next follow-up question.
Chair, I think Peter Ward's got his hand up.
Yes, Peter Ward.
You're on mute, Peter.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning again, and I've obviously mentioned this on previous at previous meetings. We're currently building on Tilbury 2, which is obviously a consented DCO, a construction material aggregate terminal, which will be the largest aggregate import terminal in the UK. Now, part of that includes a concrete ready-mix plant, an asphalt plant, basically everything you need to build a road, and that is 200 metres from the tunnel portal, sitting on our land at the moment. So we are in a dialogue with Highways England, clearly, to utilise that facility, and that facility has the capability to take at least 50% of the construction traffic off of Thurrock's roads. So I would sort of ask members really to perhaps be behind that in terms of mitigation. Clearly, Highways England can see the benefits of that facility on their doorstep. They can't dictate it within their DCO because of procurement rules, because obviously it's operated by, you know, one of the operators that would probably be within the bidding on the construction, certainly as a tier 2 contractor. But I think we should be pushing. I'm not denying there's commercial opportunity for the port in this, but that is benefiting one of Thurrock's largest employers, and it will give significant benefits to the construction traffic. You know, if you can take 50% of the traffic off the roads during construction that's never going to go on an outside road, then there must be a massive benefit in that.
Thank you for that, Peter. I think what Councillor Allen's point earlier about work and local businesses, along with getting traffic off roads, if this does all go ahead, and we want to make sure we minimise that amount of any traffic on local roads, and also maximise any potential for businesses and residents in the area. One thing to have a large motorway sort of put upon your area, which runs right through the middle of it. It's another thing if people from much further afield than Thurrock get any of what small benefit there is from this. Thank you very much for that, Peter. I think it's good points. Lucy, has anyone else got their hand up?
No, it doesn't look like it, Chair. No.
Okay, we've spent just over around 35 minutes on this, so I think that's really good. Thank you very much for bringing that forward. I think that's been a really useful discussion. And in terms of the withdrawal, you almost want to say sort of, we told you so. But yeah, we'll see what comes back in the new year.
Yeah.
Going to move on to the next agenda item, which is item 6, economic mitigation list, which is found in pages 13 to 20. Chris, who would like to lead on this?
It's me. I'll provide you with a bit of an update. So members will be aware that we brought a summary document of the economic mitigation list, the phase 2 of the work, September, was it? September time? Since that time, we've had renewed discussions with Highways England, and obviously we've had Matt Palmer, who's come on board, who's very keen to change the narrative and change the working relationship. So we have shared the full detailed technical report with Highways England, as well as the summary list on a confidential basis at the moment. Our intention is that we will be publishing a public-facing document in January, and we will also, on the website at the same time, publish the full technical document along with the non-technical summary. We have a meeting tomorrow with Highways England to discuss our list. We had intended to talk to members on task force tonight about an approach to prioritising that list. However, Highways England have confirmed there is a significant proportion of items on that list that they think they can incorporate into the DCO. And so we are waiting confirmation from them about what they are intending to include and how it will be secured. And then whatever is left, we will report back to members in the new year and talk about how we're going to prioritise it. Many opportunities to provide things. So elements of the mitigation can be provided either in the DCO document itself, either through a Section 106 agreement or through a grant agreement. And then there may be elements of what we are seeking in our mitigation list that will need the council's powers to deliver, because we have much more extensive powers for the economic, social and environmental well-being of our residents. So the bottom line is, we're not presenting you this evening with what we had hoped, because there's been quite a rapid change and development over the course of the last 2 weeks. So we will come back to you with a smaller list, because hopefully some elements will have been secured so they can go off that list, and we'll focus on the remaining. We very much envisage the task force having a role in prioritising whatever is left on the list to be delivered. And we'll provide a report and update on the approach in the new year, if that's okay, Chair, but happy to take questions.
Thank you. And I think Councillor Rice had his hand up halfway through, so must be something.
Thank you, Chair. Anna, on page 15, it talks about additional noise mitigation in Chadwell and East Tilbury. Can you tell us what that entails?
I can't off the top of my head, Councillor Rice. I don't know whether Chris is more familiar with that and can answer that question off the top of his head.
Yes. Is it page 15 of the main report?
It is, yes, 15.
Let me just scroll to it, just a tick.
It won't be 15 of the main report. The main report's not been published.
Okay, so which
what are we talking
page,
about? The summary list, Councillor
Page 15 of our report, of our agenda.
The summary report.
Yes, must be. Yes, yes.
There's only 8 pages in the summary report, so I'm just trying to hone down on what you're looking at, so I can look at it too, and then I can answer you.
It talks about reference M6.
M6. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. Let me switch to that. Excuse me a minute while I just find where I can get to that. Okay. Right. Okay. Yes. In the main report, it talks about those locations being highlighted as vulnerable to significant noise increases during construction, and that they have vulnerable communities within them. So we've said that our initial thought is that there's not enough mitigation. Now, if you remember, we did talk about in a previous meeting noise barriers that were going up at various heights from anything from 1 to 6 meters in different places. Clearly, whatever there is not quite enough. And therefore, we've just put a marker down to say, look, these areas is probably where the road gets closest to communities. And therefore, we want to look more closely at how we deal with it. And I mean, judging by what Anna said, and having had the discussions, there seems to be an overwhelming wish to try and placate us and please us with commitments to do this, that, and the other. So I would imagine there'll be something coming out of this, but it'll take us and our noises specialists to work out more detail around it. But it's looking promising, Councillor.
Thank you.
I believe Councillor Muldowney was next.
Thank you, Chair. As you're here, Chris, is there any update on the enhancing of green spaces, which is L15 on that list?
Okay, just a moment.
We haven't got any updates yet until we've had the meeting with Highways England about these. So we haven't got any detail we can give you really, other than what is in that summary list. It's work in progress, and we'll provide an update when we can. The detail is to be worked out, and there will be a lot of work that will need to be done in consultation with Highways England, but there'll be a lot of work for our own officers to do in identifying, we've identified the issue. What we've not done is identified the solution, and that's the next step for a lot of this work. So, it may be that we produce some form of tracker on the mitigation schedule and the summary list that we just put as a standard item on the agenda and update it every month, so that we can provide you with a running or roving programme of what's being addressed. That might be the way to deal with it, but that's something that we can talk about in January when we've got further information about what is being provided and what isn't.
Just to reassure you, though, looking more at the detail, given what we said at the previous task force, we have changed the main report. So we said a number of green spaces in close proximity to the LTC are of low quality and needing upgrading. And the list we offer is Koala Park, King George's Playing Fields, Wickham Fields, Orsett Heath, Chadwell Heath, as well as Blackshots Nature Area. So everything that you mentioned before in your request and earlier this evening is covered now, so that they have a complete list, and we just got to work through the detail now.
Great, that's great to hear. I mean, it is good to hear that you're getting a different attitude from Highways England now in terms of being more willing to play the game on mitigation. I still reserve my opinion for when we actually hear the detail of the health impact assessments on whether it's going to be enough.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm not sure if it can ever be enough, but anyway, we don't have that detail yet, so I'll reserve my judgment till we get to that point. But thanks for that update. That does reassure me. Thank you.
Lucy, has anyone else got their hands up at the moment?
I think it was Councillor Allen next, and then Councillor Jeffries.
If we go in that order, then please, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. As we know, this road is going to be a toll road. Some would probably consider it to be a cash cow. And in terms of mitigation or, sweeteners that we can acquire for having this this motorway pass through our borough, or I'd like to say a stake through the beating heart of Thurrock, actually. Now, would we be what can I say? Would we be naughty to ask government and Highways England to actually acquire a percentage of the tolls that are collected from the motorway, so it could be a sustainable path for impacts over the many years that we're literally going to have to put up with this motorway and traffic passing through our borough.
Councillor Allen, in the summary document, we have a provision in there for seeking to secure a percentage of the toll to go into an environment sinking fund should Highways England breach any air quality issues along the route. And that's one of the mitigations that we are seeking. It's not in the gift of Highways England, I'm afraid. It's a DFT matter that we will need to take up with them at the relevant time, but it is in the mitigation schedule and in the list that we shared in September.
Yes, if you want to look at item M18 in particular, it talks about the toll hypothecation. And what we're suggesting there is that some of the money that is paid for the tolls is given to Thurrock to deal with support projects. And like Anna said, it's a matter for the DFT to decide. Generally speaking, they say no, but we'll wait and see.
Thank you both. And how could we actually push for that, Chris? Is there a way that we can, really push so we acquire a percentage of the tolls taken?
Councillor Allen, we don't know at the moment. Again, you're asking all the right questions, but it's a little bit early in the process for us to provide you with any answers yet. The first thing we've got to do is understand from Highways England what they're going to provide, what's left, how it's going to be provided, and what we need to do. So again, we're just a little bit ahead of the game here. We need to just have a bit of patience at the moment to allow officers to work through it, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Anna. And just going back quickly to the trees as well, if we could throw that in as well.
So there are conversations taking place already about forestry and trees and planting. So there are conversations that Steve Plum, who is the relevant officer, is involved in and engaged in. So again, it will be something that we can provide an update to a future task force on.
Lovely, thank you, and thank you, Chair, for giving me the time. Thank you.
And just to add to that, L22 in the summary document, page 5, covers tree planting across Thurrock, so it's in there.
Fingers crossed on that one, Chris.
Sure.
Tree planting with forest aspirations. I know in task force we spoke about creating new forests in Thurrock. So yeah, it's definitely on the list, Councillor Allen. Go now to Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question for Anna. First of all, love the Christmas decorations, Anna. You're the only one with anything up. The rest of us all look a bit bar humbug. Anna, simple yes or no to this. Previous meetings, you talked about some of the soundboards that they were putting up as being sort of like a skirting board and not doing a great deal. I might be being really lazy here and you say it's in there and I should have read it, but has there been any movement on that?
Yeah, there's been no movement yet, but it's part of our mitigation and part of the discussion. So 2 things that we are looking to have some greater control over One is the materials used as part of the soundproofing and whether they're absorptive rather than reflective. So we'll be engaging with our technical team to provide some feedback on that. Obviously, the scale and height of them is also quite important, and in terms of the location too. So they're both things that we will be having conversations about, and they are obviously things that are included in the mitigation schedule. One of the things that we've been talking to Highways England about in terms of design is making sure that sound barriers are incorporated in structures design. So the Mardyke Viaduct, the Tilbury Viaduct, making sure, you know, they don't produce a viaduct and then stick a wooden sound barrier on the top of it that draws your eye to what could potentially be an ugly structure. So to be fair to Highways England, the design team are very alive to that. And given the renewed approach, and it is a renewed approach, and it has been a reset of the relationship, I'm sure Chris will agree with me, there's been a huge shift in approach, in attitudes, and in momentum. So, you know, I'm really confident and hopeful of where we are currently and for the negotiations in the future. It has been quite a staggering change.
Okay, thank you.
Lucy, was there anyone before Councillor Muldowney?
I think Councillor Allen and then Councillor Muldowney.
Councillor Allen, was that an old hand? Was up?
Yeah, thank you. No, it's another one. If you don't mind, is that okay?
Yeah, it could be brief, and then we'll go straight to Councillor Muldowney after. Thank you.
Okay, Anna touched on the raised elevations, the viaducts. With her current experience, can she sort of give us a little insight to what we could expect along these viaducts to see?
We've asked Highways England to come and present to you on the design of the Mardyke Viaduct in particular, but design generally of structures for the January meeting. So I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. You'll have to wait until then.
Thank you, Anna. But will these designs sound deaden the road noise which would be carried on an elevated section?
So we'll be having conversations about quiet road noise material, surface material. As we're doing on the A13, it'll be a similar request. We've been having conversations with them about the design and incorporating sound barriers into the design. What I've seen of the Mardyke Viaduct, I'm encouraged by. And also, if you remember me talking to you a while ago about requirements discharge and the fact that Highways England put all of their requirements for discharge to the DFT, so the local authority has no control. Highways England are very receptive to conversations about not giving us permission to discharge all requirements, but certainly the ones that are key to us and the ones that matter. And one of the things that I've said will matter will be the design of the structure. So for Highways England in their procurement process, Peter will know this, they want the design to be as broad as possible so they keep as much flexibility as possible in their procurement process. That helps them drive costs down. However, they also then want to discharge the requirement that dictates what it looks like. And what we've said to Highways England is, you can't have your cake and eat it. If you want the flexibility, we'll give you the flexibility, but you've got to give us the power and the authority to discharge the final design. So they're very alive to that issue and very receptive to it now. So we're going in the right direction.
And just to add, item M13 is the use of low noise road surfacing on the LTC and the local network. So that will be a matter for discussion too.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll come after Councillor Muldowney. Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to highlight L20, which is the carbon offsetting of the LTC scheme. It's good to see that in there. I do understand you haven't got an update at the moment, but obviously just to reference, you know, other groups that are working alongside us, that we've now got the freedom of information information about the emissions, which are going to be around 5.3 million tonnes, including construction and operational phase. Now, Anna, I know that you said at the last meeting that if the Highways England did not meet the emissions targets that they set for themselves, they'll need to put funds into an account for Thurrock to use. Does this relate to CO2 emissions? And if so, does this figure?
So there's two elements to emissions. There's the construction element to the emissions. So emissions created from all of the concrete that they're going to use. For example, one of the biggest carbon emission producers is concrete. So that's obviously an issue. And then there's the operation of the road, which are two different things. The point that we made about the carbon offsetting and if Highways England don't meet their targets is something that's a desire of ours in the mitigation schedule. It's not something that Highways England is committed to, but under the emerging legislation and in terms of the environmental impact assessment, we need to look at it and work out what is what we can secure and what we can't. And until I get into the detail with the team, we just don't know at this point in time. We're just stabbing in the dark. So I'd rather make sure we've done the work and we can come back to you with a factual, credible position that you can then take away.
Great, that's great. So I suppose when we go into the work programme, we'll talk about putting some of this on the work programme. Also, the Transport Action Network challenges. Certainly, I'd like to see updates about those and how that is going to impact what we're doing moving forwards, and also potentially how that's going to impact if they're successful, what kind of impact that could have on the scheme going forwards. So certainly like to see that coming forward in the future. But obviously, I understand that you've got a 55,000 page document. We're not expecting you to get up to date on that within a couple of days. But thanks for those details that you've given. And just to echo something that the chair has said recently as well, that it's I think it's certainly good that we've kept the Lower Thames Crossing Task Force going, particularly as you know it was raised that we might have come to the end of our usefulness with the DCO going in, but obviously with that being withdrawn, we've got this extra time now, so very glad to see that we're still going, and that we're going to have a healthy work programme moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Completely agree. It's effectively gives some time. I've got a quick admin question, I suppose. We've been talking about different things on this list, and we know it's going to change around and things fall away and things like that. Are the references we see today relating to those items, can we retain those into a tracker system going forward? Because I think it'd be helpful for members to start referencing those different references.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So we're going to be talking a lot of like M numbers and L numbers going forward. I think it's going to be, like Councillor Muldowney said, I think we're going to have a very, very busy work schedule in 2021. And yes, I'm very pleased that the task force continues and didn't stop at the submission of DCO, because I don't know where we'd be at that point. It wouldn't be a good thing for Thurrock residents and Thurrock Council. Lucy, has anyone else got their hand up?
No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, well, we've spent around about 30 minutes on that item. I think it's going to be obviously an ongoing thing on our agendas. Anna's going to be coming back to us in early next year, and then we'll be moving forward with this and starting to really get to the detail of it, and looking forward to seeing those reports and work come through. So I'm going to move now on to agenda item 7, which is a verbal update, which Anna Eastgate will be presenting, and it's the A303 questions and comments. Over to you, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So members will recall that we talked about the Stonehenge scheme, the A303, and we talked about it actually in the context of the successful challenge to Heathrow on the Paris Agreement and the adoption of the airport's NPS, if you recall. And we talked about the fact that the relevant policy for road schemes is the NPS for national networks, adopted in about 2014, so it's about 6 years old now. But it is an adopted policy nonetheless, against which Highways England needed to have their application assessed. A303 has been the first major DCO out of the blocks and determined since that successful challenge of Heathrow. So we always said that there would be a watch this space, and we'd provide an update to members once the decision had been made. So the A303 Amesbury to Berwick Down development consent order was granted on the 12th of November. It has been delayed. It was due originally earlier in the year. The scheme basically puts a dual carriageway in tunnel underneath the World Heritage Site at Stonehenge. This was an application that was accepted by the Planning Inspectorate, and you might want to note that I ran the statutory consultation for this scheme for Highways England. Read into that what you may. The main point to note from the decision letter was that this was a recommendation by the panel, the examining authority, to refuse consent. However, the Secretary of State decided to overturn that decision and grant consent. It probably won't surprise members that the main reasons at issue on this scheme were the potential harm to an outstanding universal value and World Heritage Site at Stonehenge, and other associated cultural heritage issues. The decision letter is quite lengthy. It's about 29 pages long. There has been a challenge to the scheme, as we understand, by the Stonehenge Alliance, and this may be one of those elements that we add to the work programme when we come on to discuss that, to provide you with an update as that progresses. But I'm happy to take any questions of any members, Chair.
Thank you, Anna, for that. I think it's important that this task force is kept up to date on some of the other projects that could potentially impact the Lower Thames crossing. So welcome that information going forward. I believe Councillor Muldowney had a hand up first. Lucy, if you anyone before?
No, I think it's Councillor Muldowney.
Councillor Muldowney.
Anna, can you explain, sort of for those that may be listening, what relevance this has for us, that this application has been granted? Because the Planning Inspectorate refused it, is that correct?
The
The Secretary of State for Transport has approved it. So how does that impact us or apply to us, or maybe you could explain for those who are listening?
So it's quite interesting, because the only other scheme that has been recommended for approval actually by the examining authority, but then overturned and refused by the Secretary of State, was the Pre-Sol Halite gas storage facility. So it was the opposite of this decision. That was challenged by the promoter of the scheme, and the decision to refuse permission was quashed, and it went back to the Planning Inspectorate in order for them to make the decision again, and the scheme was actually approved. So the relevance for this is that the examining authority recommended approval of the scheme, recommended refusal of the scheme, sorry, and the Secretary of State overturned that recommendation and recommended approval. If the Stonehenge Alliance is successful in its challenge, then what that will do is quash the decision to grant the road consent, and will be remitted back to the Planning Inspectorate to make a recommendation, and the decision will be made again. It depends on what grounds the Stonehenge Alliance could succeed in that challenge. We need to wait and see the detail for the challenge. They need to apply to get leave to judicially review it. So it's a two-stage process. The first stage is that they put in an argument and apply for leave to JR the decision. If that submission has legs, they have grounds, then it will be progressed for a full hearing where both parties will be required to submit a skeleton argument and a judge will make a decision on the matter. So it's probably got some time to go yet, but it will be interesting to see on what grounds the decision is challenged, whether it's challenged on the basis that it was an unreasonable decision given the recommendation relating to cultural heritage. Of course, that site is probably one of the most famous sites in the world, hence it's a World Heritage Site. So whether it's a question of unreasonableness, it was such an irrational or unreasonable decision that nobody could have reasonably made it. Who knows? Let's see what happens. But we'll provide a watching brief. We'll provide a bit of an update to you. We'll put it on the work plan and report back in the future. If there is any learning from it, in particular, it's a tunnel, of course, that's the relevance and to us. We don't have the same level of cultural heritage and protection through our borough. We do have some, but not to that extent. We'll apply any learning to our own scheme and provide an update to members.
Thank you, Anna. Can you, just to get you and maybe Chris's opinion, were you surprised, A, that the planning inspectorate refused approval, and then B, that the Secretary of State for Transport overrode that and gave approval?
I was surprised it was recommended to refuse because the road, I mean, you'll all be familiar with that site. The road, when we were consulting on the scheme, and this isn't often you get to do this, but we consulted on the scheme with visuals and noise information, because ordinarily on a road scheme, you're not promoting it on the basis that it takes noise away. But for Stonehenge, because the road went in a tunnel underneath it, we were promoting the scheme at Highways England on the basis that it improved the experience at the World Heritage Site. It reinstated some historic roadways and pathways that have been lost as a consequence of development in the landscape, and it promoted and reinstated a sense of tranquility at the locality. So I was quite surprised it was recommended for refusal, because the whole visitor experience at the Stonehenge site was going to be much improved. I understand why, potentially, because there is a lot of buried historical information in the ground there, and the impact along the entirety of the route, not just Stonehenge, is going to be quite significant. At the point at which the road is going underneath the World Heritage Site, it's fairly deep anyway, so the chances of it impacting on that ecology and historic information, buried archaeology there, is probably limited. It's further actually at the junctions at either end of the tunnel where the impacts are more likely. So I was quite surprised. I was also quite surprised that the Secretary of State overturned it, but English Heritage was supportive of the scheme. So the Secretary of State went along with English Heritage. English Heritage, of course, own and manage the site, and they also run the visitor centre there. So potentially they have more to gain from the scheme than UNESCO.
Thanks, Anna.
Lucy, anyone else with a question on this item?
No, there's no more raised hands.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think, like I mentioned earlier, just good to hear about these things and have valuable questions asked by members of how it can relate to the Lower Thames Crossing. So thank you very much for that. Then we move on to item 8, which is the work programme. I think we'll be spending a little bit of time on this. I know Anna has already suggested some items for this, so maybe Anna could run through those first, then we'll go to members and see what else can be added.
Okay, I'd like to do a bit of a review of the work programme with Chris offline, really, but I've got a list of things that I think we need to add into it. And I think what we'll do, Chair, is Chris and I'll work up a programme of what we think is appropriate, and we'll send it to you and Lucy, and then maybe we can agree it at the next meeting. But the list of things to add onto it is a paper on CO2 emissions, a paper on the energy white paper, the review of the DCO documentation and some form of summary note and document to the group on that, an update on the Transport Action Network Challenge, and an update on the A303, and also the prioritisation of the mitigation list. So that's the list of things that I've gathered from this evening, unless anybody's got anything else that they think we need to add on to that. But that's quite a lot of work already.
I was going to say that should keep us fairly busy. Does any members have any further items they'd like added? Councillor Spillman.
Yeah, if possible. I mean, I've mentioned trees enough times, but yeah, if the the viability of and the expense and the logistics of a very, very large tree and meadow project would be much appreciated, because I know what I'd like to see, but I've got no idea of the actual logistics and the expense of it.
Okay, that is part of our mitigation list of stuff, so we'll come back with that.
Councillor Muldowney.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm presuming that the DCO document that will maybe break down into a few things. There'll be the review of the health impacts and the environmental impact. So that's probably going to be quite a few things, big things on the work programme. But I also wondered what committee felt about actually having the Transport Action Network, if possible, come and speak to us about the legal challenges that they're taking forward. And would that release some of the burden of work on Anna and her team?
I think we need to take that offline and understand whether that fits within the terms of reference for the committee and whether it's appropriate to do so.
Okay, fair enough.
Can't see any hands. Lucy, can you see anyone else?
No, no more hands raised.
Thank you. I think Anna and Chris are gonna work on this and come back with something for the next meeting, and then we can get that finalised.
Chair, sorry, is that we will have Highways England invited to. Well, we already have verbally invited them to come along and do a presentation on design for the first meeting back in the new year. So, and Matt Palmer as well to come along to introduce himself to you, because I think that's really important.
Will that be January or the February meeting?
January
later?
18th. January the 18th.
Is that the viaducts and things like that, the design side of things? So was that for January?
Yes, it is, Chair.
I think we're going to have to make January quite a long meeting by the sound of it. So yeah, make sure you're available for that one. I think then that if no one else has got their hand raised on the work agenda, work programme, that concludes the business of the meeting this evening. And I declare the meeting closed at 19:19 p.m. Just want to thank you all for your time and questions, and wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you in January. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.